Hello Art 1 students. So this video is going to show you how to get started on your nose drawing, and remember that this one at the very top of the page is the one that is due. You will eventually be doing these ones as well, but first I want you guys to focus on that top nose, which is the frontal view. And one thing that is very important to remember when you are drawing a nose is to make sure that the nostrils are relatively level. They don't necessarily need to be identical or symmetrical, but you do want them to be pretty level so that they look like they are actually coming off of the sides of the tip of the nose. So I'm just going to follow right along with the paper that you guys are using. I'm going to start with a very lightly drawn circle. Now, once again, just like drawing the eye, it's okay if your circle is not perfect, because people's noses are not actually a perfect circle on the tip of the nose. Some people have more of a longer oval, some have more of a squatty oval, some have more of a triangle. So each person that you draw is going to have a slightly different beginning shape, but it's still going to start by sort of indicating where the tip of the nose is there. And then I'm just going to draw a bit of the bridge of the nose. It's going to get narrower up here, a little bit wider down towards the bottom, and then I'm going to actually turn my page to start to draw the sides for my nostril on both sides. And once again, I'm not going to worry too much about making them perfectly symmetrical. What I'm going to focus more on is making sure that they are pretty level. So I'm going to hold my pencil down, and it looks like the one on the right hand side is a bit lower. So I'm just going to erase the one on the left. And I'm going to go ahead and sort of redraw that one a little lower. It can help to actually draw a line here, but that's not necessary. But if you would like to draw a line there, if that helps you, then by all means, go right ahead. And then I'm going to draw sort of the outer edge of my nostril here on both sides. So now that nose is about at the step 3 point of what your packet has. So then step 4 is where some of the steps become a little bit less necessary than others. You do have kind of a line that goes here. They've divided sort of the bottom part into thirds, almost like triangles. And then this part has a bit of a square on it, which then goes up into the bridge of the nose. And then they have extended these lines going up the side a little bit. Now these two outer lines are mostly just guidelines for shading. You will not see those lines at the end. The rest of the lines that are in the tip of the nose sort of show you where the shadows and the highlights go. Because this sort of square area here is the bulk of the highlight on the tip of the nose. And then these little corner spaces show you where the nose sort of goes back into the face a little bit and shades around the bridge of the nose, which does come forward a little bit. So now I'm going to go ahead and look at step 5, which is some early shading steps. And I'm just going to do it kind of exactly how they've got theirs, even though that may not necessarily be how I would do every single nose. So essentially, this part of the nose is just a little darker than the rest. And then they've left that sort of square out of the middle right now, so that there's nothing in it. And then they've got some shading here. And along the side of the bridge. A little bit on this side as well. And then a little bit on the outside part of the nostril. The main thing is, as usual, make sure that you are using gradients. Turn the page as needed. And make sure that anything that you do is not an actual line. Because when drawing people's noses, when you look at their nose, there are no lines on the face. It's all just different value transitions. Now, under the nostril, we're going to go ahead and get some pretty decently dark value in there, because that's basically a hole. So it is going to probably end up being the darkest part of our nose. Still not getting full shading yet. Still not going super dark. Everything is still kind of mid-tone area. We're going to darken the edges here just a little bit. Once again, still keeping them as value scales almost. So they are darkest on the outer edge and then get lighter as they move toward the inner part. Because right now I'm just trying to make sure that my example looks as much like my reference image as possible. Looking more at the reference image than I am at what I am drawing. Because when you are doing an actual portrait of a person, it is very, very important that you look more at the person than at your actual drawing of that person. So that might be an example of step 5. It does not look like much yet. And then I'm going to move into step 6 and 7, which is really when you start to get the nose to look like a nose. We're going to be using a kneaded eraser a little bit. We're going to be using our tortillon a little bit. And we're going to be darkening parts of the nose. But remember, the biggest thing is that there are no lines. So anytime you increase the value, you need to fade it out into the paper color or the next lighter color as you go along. You don't want there to be any really abrupt dark to light. It should all be pretty smooth. And notice I have not used my tortillon at all yet. And that is because I want you all to practice making sure that you make the values, the transitions, with your pencil before you start trying to shade or blend too much with the tortillon. So again, I'm just looking at my reference image, really trying to make sure that I match it as best I can, leaving some of those areas for reflected light along the sort of ball of the nose, just like when we did our sphere shading. There is still going to be some reflected light in here because it is a three-dimensional form. Still leaving that highlight area mostly light. And building up that shading layer after layer after layer. There's lots of layers, especially on the nose. So the bottom of the nose here is going to be darker, and I just went completely off the page. The bottom of the nose is going to be darker here, and then there is a bit of a reflected light. So I'm going to go ahead and darken this spot, shade that up, and get lighter and lighter as I get toward the highlight. And do that from a couple different directions, so that it keeps that sort of roundness and that softness there on the nose. And then there is a shadow under that spot here, on the other side of that reflected light. which then goes directly into the nostril here. And over here. And again, just fading that back out so that I don't end up with any lines. And that ends up going into that sort of divot that is above people's lips, between the nose and the lips. So that's where this shadow sort of indicates. So now I'm going to go back into my nostrils a little bit, make them even a little darker. Remember, you would eventually be using multiple pencils, but now I'm just using a number 2, which is kind of an HB. But you would definitely use more than just an HB when you were shading to really get that full depth in there. Just going to kind of define my nostril a little bit here. Bring that shadow down so I can see where it comes sort of off of the skin there. Do the same thing on the other side. And now I'm just looking again at my reference image, getting all those little details, shadows, highlights, those different things in there. Still not at my darkest dark value yet. Simply because I do want to make sure that I am careful and make sure that I'm not making anything too dark. Because it's always easier to make something darker than it is to make it lighter. I'm going to bring some of this shading together a little bit above the ball of the nose so that the bridge kind of dips back and then comes forward again. And then this part of the bridge would usually kind of branch out towards the eyes a little bit. So there is a bit of a shadow there. So now I'm just going back in and I'm darkening some of those areas. I'm squinting when I look at my paper, the reference image piece, because what squinting does is help me figure out exactly where those darkest darks are in relation to the not as dark darks. And that will just help me make sure that I really get the depth that I'm after, which will allow my nose to look really three-dimensional. So still no Tortillon use, no kneaded eraser yet, and I'm still just working on building up my shading. The next video that I show you on the nose, I will use the Tortillon and the kneaded eraser, and we'll kind of finish up or get pretty close to finishing up with this nose. Or at least as finished as it will get with a number 2 pencil.